The death toll mounting on both sides after 3 days of violence between Israel and militants on the Gaza Strip. 4 Israelis, at least 23 Palestinians have died. These have been some of the most intense clashes for years. Let's cross now for more on this, if we can, to Brooke Goldstein, human rights attorney and executive director at the Lawfare Project. Brooke, thank you for joining me this morning. Why has this outbreak of violence been so serious, even by comparison to other outbreaks that we've seen?
Well, I think, Darren, first of all, thank you for covering this issue and for having me. What we're seeing right now is actually quite predictable in terms of an escalation, a cross-border escalation with Israel and with Hamas in Gaza, because we've had relative peace. And if you look at history, if you know how things start there, is when you have an element of calm. It's a situation where Hamas, which is a designated terrorist group, which basically feeds off, the money that is sent to it by foreign groups and organizations and states, and oppresses its own people. When there's calm, it's not good for Hamas. So they do what they always do. They launch rockets at Israel, the sleeping giant. They want Israel to awake, and they want Israel to predictably strike back, which is what it has to do if you have over 600 rockets targeting innocent civilians. And then Hamas hides behind civilians, uses civilians as human shields. The death toll rises, and frankly, it's a miracle. There's almost 1,000 rockets that have gone back and forth. It's a miracle that relatively little people have died, a relatively low number, even though every life is a tragic loss. And then, the escalation will die down within a couple of days. It'll get under control, and you'll have condemnation, mostly of Israel, mostly because there are civilians dead on the Hamas side, because they are used as human shields, and it'll start up all over again.
Well, you say the Hamas side. We're talking, of course, about the Palestinians, not all of whom support Hamas, as I'm sure you know. The Israeli army,
right. So
the Israeli
Arabs
army
that are under control of the area that Hamas exerts sovereign control over Arabs in that area. When I say Israelis, I mean Israelis of all religion and color, and the Druze. I just heard a story of a 4-year-old Druze girl who is hiding and is experiencing trauma because every 5 minutes there's a siren, and the Druze live, in the south as well with the Bedouins.
We do know that the Israeli army, as you say that more than 600 rockets have been fired into Israeli territory since Saturday. 320 have gone the other way, so twice as many have come towards Israel as have gone the other way. But the death toll doesn't reflect that, does it? With 4 Israelis and 23 Palestinians to have lost their life. Plainly, what needs to happen here is that people need to stop firing rockets at each other. There is
absolutely.
talk of a ceasefire potentially being brokered by the UN, Qatar, Egypt. What do we know of that?
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to address the first point, and I know you mean well, but it really only in a backwards world do we look at a situation where one terrorist launches rockets against a democracy, killing civilians, who would say, oh, well, the death toll is disproportionate, so something's wrong here.
I'm not saying something's wrong. I'm just observing that the death. I'm just observing that the death toll is disproportionate and doesn't reflect the number of rockets that have been fired at either side.
It's very low for one reason and one reason only, because Israel has an iron dome that protects its civilians, and because Israel goes above and beyond the laws of armed conflict and protects the civilians that are under control of Hamas.
Okay.
Otherwise, 1,000 rockets back and forth, we'd expect a lot more death.
Well, I think, as I say, what we need to focus on is the fact that 1,000 rockets have been thrown back and forth, and that needs to stop happening. So 27 people have lost their lives. 1,000 rockets have been fired back and forth, roughly speaking. On the ceasefire that I mentioned, the hope that the UN, Qatar, Egypt are going to work together to broker some sort of ceasefire. Do we know if that's likely to be successful?
How many ceasefires now have we had? And what good is a ceasefire if it's only going to last for maybe a year and fire up again with the whole predictable nature?
I think it's probably good news for the people that would otherwise have died during that year.
Well, it's not good news if Hamas uses it to, take money and weaponize and build tunnels and.
Well, are you saying there shouldn't be one? Are you saying there shouldn't be one? Then?
No, what I'm saying is that there should be a cessation of calls for violence on both sides. A ceasefire is just a mere pause. What there has to be is
a ceasefire is a necessary prerequisite, surely, to ending any conflict.
Of course. But to focus on a ceasefire being brokered by Qatar or what have you without focusing on the level of violent incitement and the fact that Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization, controls a territory holding civilians in hostage, that's the problem we have to solve right now.
Absolutely. But for the sake of the people who might otherwise die over the course of the next year if there isn't a ceasefire, once again, do we know of any likelihood of success as far as this ceasefire and the reports of the UN, Qatar and Egypt trying to broker one are concerned?
You know, I have to say, Darren, you know as much as I do in terms of predicting the future there. What I do know is regardless of any ceasefire, if Hamas continues to weaponize and continues to teach its civilians to kill Israelis for the sake of jihad, including its own children, then we will have continued violence in the future.
Brooke, thank you. Brooke Goldstein, human rights attorney and executive director at the Lawfare Project, joining me this morning. As I say, the numbers are horrifying. And this has been an outbreak of violence which has been greater, bigger than many that we've seen in the past. 0345 6060 973.